All right, I'd like to welcome my good friend, Kenny Payne. Thank you for taking the time to do this and talk to us. There's several things that I want to talk to you about that I think that would be good for our church to discuss and hear what you have to say about it. But before we get very far into it at all, I've got to ask. You had kind of a health scare a few months ago. We talked about it here. A lot of people were praying for you. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened and how you've been doing since then?
Yes. First, I want to say hello to everyone at the North Augusta Church, one of my favorite church families. I always love coming and visiting and spending time with you guys. And Adam, of course, it's always great to see an old friend. I don't mean to call you old, but we've been friends for a long time. And our friendship has been very rich and a great blessing to my life. So thanks for that. When I got to the hospital, they did a CT scan to figure out. By that time, people were convinced I was having a stroke. They were trying to figure out if it was like a clot-induced stroke where blood's not getting there, or if it's a bleeding in my brain, because you treat those in two radically different ways. So they did a CT scan and found a clot in the artery on this side, the back artery. And sure enough, what had happened was there was a tear, and the blood goes into the tear instead of going through the vessel, and then it kind of balloons and it closes the blood flow. And just kind of, it is a sort of clot, but it's also just pressure driven. The blood's going that way instead of up the vein. And so they gave me a super clot buster. It's called TPA. And I had to lay flat for 24 hours after that. They moved me to a different hospital that had a better neurology department in Nashville, Centennial in Nashville. 2 days later, I went straight home from ICU. And actually within hours, my speech was better. I didn't notice any thought process problems, but Laura said she noticed a little bit. My vocabulary changed.
Yeah.
But I think part of that was I was just trying to compensate. Like, what I learned then is that our bodies are truly an amazing creation, and it's something that you can't see and you can't control can literally knock you in the dirt. You know, it was really weird to have full mental capacity, or at least what I considered full mental capacity, but I couldn't control my legs. I couldn't even catch a basketball. Nothing like that's ever happened to me before. I've always been very healthy. So it was really weird.
Now, how have you been? How have you been since then? Are there any residual effects? Is it just a thing that happened and you're fully recovered? How does that work?
The neurologist said it was just a freak thing. They don't know why it happened. It wasn't because I'm a candidate for a stroke, but obviously you can have a stroke without being a candidate, because I did.
Right.
And they don't really know why it happened. They never could give me an answer about why. These things just sometimes happen. So she told me, don't live your life in fear of that. It was a fluke thing, and it's probably not going to happen again. So the only residual effect is I hadn't been checking my blood pressure for a long time. I used to check it all the time when I would give blood. But since I've been traveling to Ukraine, they won't let me get blood anymore, so I don't need to check my blood pressure. And so it's running a little high. So they put me on some blood pressure medication, and I take that every day. My wife decided, that happened in December, and they put me on like light duty through January. And I started traveling around speaking churches at the end of January, and I could play basketball again in February. So February 26th, I had the ability to fly to Ukraine to spend, I was planning to spend a few months there. Laura and Lexi were staying in the States because Lexi is finishing her junior year and was making college decisions, taking the ACT, that kind of thing. And so I decided to go by myself. And for some reason, Laura decided that week that we should just completely redo the floor in our the basement where we live at. And I think that was just kind of a stress test. Let's see if Kenny can survive that. And if he can do that, then I know for sure that he'll be all right by himself in Ukraine. So everything worked good. The floor looks great, and I made it to Ukraine. It was really nice.
Well, speaking of Ukraine, I know that a lot of people here have been following and have a lot of interest in your work over there. first of all, how was your work in Ukraine been going since the last time we saw you, which has been, a little while? And it's also, while we're talking about it, what can you tell me about how Ukraine is being affected by the virus and everything that's going on?
Okay, I'm glad to deal with both of those. First, I think the last time I was together with the NAC family was summer of last year, if I recall correctly, probably like
Sounds
in
right.
June or something. So we headed back to Ukraine the last of July, and we're there until the 18th of December. And it was really just a great stay. As you recall, we're working with several different groups. Most of our ministry is small group based. And so we have a group of young adults that grew up, some of them in our children's program even, from the church in Gorlovka when we were able to be there before the war. Some of them came as college students, but now they're all, say, 25 to 30, 35 actually. These kids just grow up on me. But in any case, that group meets on Sunday nights, and they're doing really well. We're still meeting online through Zoom. Actually just started a study on the book of Ephesians, which I think is really going to be a blessing for them. And then we have a Saturday night college group, which is students basically from Boris Granchenko University, where I volunteer teach. And but there's also some other university students that come. People start bringing their friends, and most of the time, friends don't go to the same university. It's really cool ministry. That one still meets on Zoom too. Basically, everything we were doing just moved to Zoom when the quarantine happened because the students got sent home. The only students that are still in Kyiv and living in dorms are the international students.
Right. They're kind of
I
stranded.
I work on Tuesday nights. I work with a group of students, mostly Africans. There's some Ukrainian, but it's mostly African students. And all of them are just stuck living in the dorm. It's prohibited for them to fly home. Their parents don't have the money for that. Actually, I'm helping feed a couple of those students as well, just because they need some help.
Right.
That ministry is really going well. We're meeting every week, and it's just phenomenal. So it was a great fall.
Now, how are they? Again, our quarantine thing, and that's not even exactly the right term, but our social distancing and stuff here varies state to state. But how are they handling it over in Ukraine? What restrictions are they living under? Do you know?
Yes, that they have both suggested things, kind of like we do. We suggest you don't do this, and then there are things that are actually illegal. And students find ingenious ways to get around that. One of the things that the police were actually enforcing was you're not allowed to go to the park unless you're walking your dog. And so some students would make cardboard dogs that they could take for a walk so that they themselves could go out to the park. Use your brain. I didn't ask my source on that, whether the police frown upon that or not, but I just thought it was funny that, if you prohibit something, we'll figure out some kind of way to exploit the loophole. Most of the African students, the dorms they live in, they're supposed to be in the dorm, but they have a few hours each day where they're free to go. The cafeteria services at the schools are closed, so the students that are still there, they just have to go buy their own food and cook it. And so, for example, one of my friends, a guy named Shad, he and his roommate swap the cooking duties, and they have two other guys that live down the hall. And so he cooks like every 4 days. He cooks, then his roommate cooks, then the other two guys cook, and it rolls back to him. And so they're just, I guess it's kind of like summer camp or something, if you remember what summer camp was like. And they're still trying to do their classes online through Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And the universities weren't really prepared for that. Online courses in Ukraine are not really a thing. They are now,
Right.
of course, but there was a steep learning curve for the instructors to try to turn their course into an online course. And if you've never prepared a college course, you might be tempted to think, oh, that would really be pretty easy. But no, if you were geared to teach in the classroom and all of your preparation was going in that direction and all of your resources were in that direction, to be told, this week, okay, next week you're going to have to be fully online.
Right.
There's no way you can do that in a week. It's just
it's a steep learning curve.
not enough time.
I had to take all kind of training to be able to teach college online that the university provided, but it was, I mean, it took time. You had to go through this course and actually check off different sections until you could be proficient at it. And I was thinking about that with Emma and Chloe's teachers, even how quickly and how impressive it is, glitches and all, how quickly they got up to speed on that kind of thing. Because I know what you have to do to train for that.
Right.
This wasn't in the questions that I sent you, and I don't even know if it's a good question or not. But I know that there were some weird military stuff going on between Russia and Ukraine over the past couple of years. I probably don't know as many details as I should. But how has that been impacted by all this? Do you know? Is it kind of stalled? Or
what I've been talking about is our work in Kyiv, and we have another work in Gorlovka, which is the place we used to live. We lived there basically
I've been there.
from 2000 to 2014 when the war started. And that ministry is still going on. I preach for them every Sunday morning. It's mostly adult ladies. There's one child who attends, the granddaughter of one of these adult ladies. But there's like 6 or 7 people that still attend the church service every week. And we're actually getting some visitors. That's a really cool thing that's going on right now there. But the war continues unabated. I mean, it's the same news every day. The Ukrainian army takes fire from the rebel army. And by takes fire, what I mean is they're basically shooting surface-to-surface missiles at each other.
Right.
But in places right on the front line, they also engage each other in small arms fire and like mortar fire and things like that. And so there's a death count every day, or at least an injury count. And it really hit home to our church family. I mean, this has been going on for 6 years, and our entire church family was turned upside down. Our church was about 60 or 70 people. And when this war started in the summer of 2014, everybody just kind of ran. And, even not too worried about it. I mean, it was obviously a big deal, but one family that lives in Kyiv now, Kostya and Olga, they just decided, oh, let's go on vacation. And so they ran from the war as if, well, we're going on vacation. And they had to pack quickly and get out of town quickly because it just started. But they thought, okay, we'll be gone for 2 or 3 weeks. This thing will end and we'll come back home. And it's 6 years later and they haven't been able to come back home.
Right.
So on Good Friday, remember that Easter is a little different under the Eastern calendar than the Western calendar. So there was a week separating the 2 Easters this year. So our Easter was first, and then their Easter happened the next week. So the Good Friday of their Easter, previous to their Easter, we had our first casualty from our church family due to the war. A girl, and she's 26 years old, who grew up as a child in our children's programs and then went through our youth program, went through our college ministry. She was visiting her uncle on the outskirts of the city of Gorlovka where our church family lives. And a drone dropped a bomb on her house, her uncle's house. The uncle was outside in the garden, and of course it hit the roof and blew up. And so she got filled with shrapnel and she died just a few minutes later. The uncle was wounded but not killed because he was out in the yard and was far enough away.
Right.
He didn't sustain lethal injuries from that. But just senseless. I mean, that was not a military target. It was not close to a military target. There was nothing of military value happening there. It was a 26-year-old girl cooking food in her uncle's house for the meal that evening, and the uncle was out working in his garden. And then this girl that was part of our church family is now dead. Just senseless. And that happens every single day. So they're not as worried about COVID-19 as the rest of the world. Dying from that, well, if a bomb falls on you and kills you, you don't need to worry about COVID-19. And literally every Sunday.
Yeah, technically, that's basically terrorism. And yeah, I guess if you're already kind of living under lockdown, then this doesn't really affect you if you're worried about bombs.
It's crazy because every Sunday for 6 years now, these ladies walk to church and they hear the whistle of the surface-to-surface missiles, kind of stuff. And they know how to judge, even the little children know how to judge if it's going to land close or if it's going to land far away, depending on what it sounds like. And if you can imagine walking to church and, trying to gauge, is that one going to be close or is it going to fly right by? I think most Americans wouldn't even go to church. It's like,
Right.
I'm not going anywhere. But staying in your home, obviously, is not the safest option either. Because, Mir had no thought that they're going to drop a bomb on my house.
Right.
And yet it happened. So that continues. But it's not in the news. The reason it's not in the news is because it's not news. If something happens the same way every day for 6 years, there's nothing new to report. There's no progress on it. There's no end in sight. There's just people dying. And the sad thing is, when I was a little boy, I was born in Pensacola, Florida in 1963. And so it was 98 years after the Civil War when I was born. And I was taught, not by my parents, but I was taught by my culture to hate Yankees. 100 years after the Civil War was over, I was taught to hate people based on their geography. Right. And so what's happening in the place where I used to live and call home and still have a church family presence, still have my apartment there, hope to go back one day, is that every day for 6 years, people that are part of the same country, they're both Ukrainian citizens, their passports say Ukraine, are being taught to hate each other. And it really doesn't matter, the direction that the bomb is coming from if it kills somebody you love. It's just senseless.
Right.
So that's kind of a downer, but that's what's happening, and it's the answer to your question.
It's the reality, and it's what I'm asking about. And it's hard with the news cycle being what it is, and with this huge thing going on, to remember that there are also other things going on that impact people, particularly if they're not breaking news. It's been the reality for a while, and like I said, when I was asking about it, I said a couple of years, because you lose track. If it's not right in front of you, you lose track. So that's why I asked. Now obviously your ministry stories are a little bit different than mine, which we can tell from this conversation, because of missionary work, which is beautiful and challenging in so many different ways. I wanted to ask you if you think that you could articulate what it is that draws you to mission work, right? Because you can do 100 things, man. What is it that draws you to mission work in particular? You could even talk about how you got into it to start with. What is it that you love about it that keeps you going back?
Well, I'm an accidental missionary. I've got lots of education, and absolutely zero of my education is in missions. And in some ways, I'm a terrible missionary. I've been living in Ukraine on and off for 30 years and can barely speak the language. I mean, I can ride in a taxi and shop, but I still can't preach in the language. Russian is such a hard language. One of my friends, Vanya, who grew up in our youth program, told me a wonderful joke one time. So Moses and Paul and this Russian priest were having a conversation about what language is going to be spoken in heaven. And Moses said, well, of course it will be Hebrew. That is the language of the Ten Commandments. It's the language of the creation story. It's the language of the largest part of the Bible. And Paul says, are you kidding? It's going to be Greek, because that's the language that God used to spread Christianity throughout the entire world. So of course it's going to be Greek. And the Russian guy says, you're both wrong. It's going to be Russian. It's the only language it takes an eternity to learn. Well, I am a missionary because I went on a short-term mission trip in 1991 to the city of Gorovka. And I was even reluctant to do that. My professor, Randy Bailey, called me. I'd gotten my master's degree from Southern Christian University shortly before that in 1990. And he started calling me in March of 91 saying, hey, you want to go to Ukraine? I was like, you mean Russia? No, I don't want to go there. And then there was the coup that happened in August of 91, if you remember that. You were pretty young then. But there were actually tanks rolling down the main street, main drag of Moscow. They stopped in front of the equivalent of their parliament building that they call the White House. It's not the residence of their president, it's the parliament building. But in any case, the tanks were part of the coup. And Boris Yeltsin came out, climbed up on the tank, knocked on the door, told the
I do
guy,
remember that.
come out. Yeah, and told that guy, what are you doing? You can't shoot against your own people. And so that tank commander stood down and had all his column of tanks stand down. And I saw an interview shortly after that from an American reporter. I don't remember if it was ABC or CBS, somebody. And it was the first time I saw Russian people, the Soviet people, as people. Always before that, because of the Cold War stuff. I've seen them as cartoons. Yeah. And so there have been several things that worked in my life before that, making me think about going. Laura and I had gone to the Tulsa workshop that spring and heard Rubel Shelley speak about some work that they were already doing in Moscow. And that got me interested. Then just some things I was reading some stuff by Alexander Solzhenitsyn around that time. And that got me intrigued. And so as soon as I saw that report and that coup happened, I told Laura, I really think I want to go. And she said, I really think you should. So I called Randy and said, okay, I'm in. And his first question was, have you seen the news? And I said, yeah, that's why I'm calling. And he said, what do you mean that's why you're calling? I said, well, that's when you decided to go. He said, you're really strange, because I've already had 3 or 4 calls of people who are canceling going because they saw the news. I said, yeah, but when I saw the news, it made me want to go. So the last thing Laura said, by the way, when I got on the plane in Pensacola or Montgomery, wherever it was, to head over to Ukraine, she said, let's don't move over there. And I said, don't worry, that'll never happen. Well, we still own property there and live in Kyiv half the time. But I didn't plan to be a missionary. In fact, sometimes I even don't like that word missionary, because I'm just a local preacher. It just happens that my location is in Ukraine, not in America. Funny story, when I told my mom, this was in November of 1991, that I was going to be moving to Ukraine and doing mission work there, she started crying, and she said, that's so far away. And I said, well, it's your fault. And she looked at me real funny, like, what do you mean it's my fault? I said, well, you taught me that this Jesus business was serious. That's about real life. It's not just something that you go do on the weekend. This is about your life. And you taught me that, and I believe that. And then, of course, she started crying. She said, well, so I'm proud that you're going to follow Jesus' call, but I was just hoping he'd call you to Alabama. I can't say why I love Ukraine. I mean, I love the people. They're frustrating sometimes, but I love them. Americans are frustrating too. People are people. I love the culture. I love the food. At the same time, there's food there I can't stand, and some things about their culture drives me insane. Have you ever just gone someplace and it feels like home, even though it's not home? That's what happened to me when I went to Ukraine. It just felt like home.